Hello everyone, it's your favorite Vision on Space here, and it's no secret that when talking about Disney Hercules, one of the most common things to discuss is how it's not accurate to Greek mythology. Now, while I don't personally think this hurts the movie all that much, as it's so different, it doesn't really count as being too inconsistent, really, especially if you actually know Greek mythology, it is something that comes up a lot. However, within most discussions about it, it mostly comes down to people saying, well, they just changed it to make the story they wanted for the Disney movie, and that's pretty much how it was. However, my friends actually pointed out something quite fascinating, is how there's a different way to interpret how the inconsistencies came about. That these inconsistencies aren't just the writers wanted to tell this kind of movie and so change the mythology to fit it, but that's the out-of-universe reason. But the in-universe reason is that there actually is one. There is a reason why Disney's Hercules is not being told like it is in Greek, the actual Greco-Roman myths. So, let's get into the theory. Now, I'm not going to go into any kind of exhaustive list of how Disney's Hercules did not get mythology accurate, because A, there have been people who have done that probably way better than I ever could, and 2, that's not really what we're discussing about. We're not discussing about the inconsistencies, we're discussing about why they exist, because this is actually something quite interesting that a lot of people kind of forget about, is that Disney's Hercules is not being told as an event happening as the story unfolds. It's being told by the Muses, and not even in real time. It's being told way after the fact. You see, a detail that a lot of people forget about, or at least don't seem to acknowledge very much, is that the story of Disney Hercules is actually set in the modern day, or at least something very close to it, because the opening of the movie is literally a museum filled with old Greco-Roman statues, which we can presume must be roughly around the modern day, given kind of how the rest of the construction looks, and we're just hearing about the story of Hercules from the Muses, which does open up an interesting possibility. When the Muses tell the story, did they change around some details from the original events? I mean, after all, the entirety of Disney's Hercules outside of the opening bit is effectively just them telling the story of Hercules, which were even without malicious intent, it's possible they just are summarizing events or getting details wrong. Although, given the fact they're supposed to be the goddesses of stories, I'm willing to bet they're not accidentally making changes. But of course, this is a rather big claim to presume that they are effectively unreliable narrators. Now, of course, we do have to ask a possible alternative explanation that maybe in this version of this timeline or whatever, this is actually accurate to Greek mythology, which is a distinct possibility, as far as we can tell, the Greek gods don't seem to be real in our world, and the Muses certainly aren't hanging around in museums telling the story of Hercules. So maybe, even though this is some version of America or England, presumably, maybe, like I said, it's just a world where the story of Hercules is different. So we would need to find some evidence of discrepancies, some detail within the movie that shows a disconnect between what we can see, we know or can assume happened, versus the Muses' version of what happened. But there doesn't really seem to be any evidence to support this. After all, in the movie, it's all just the Muses telling the story, so anything could be both true or inaccurate. We'd have no way of knowing. Except we do, actually. This is something a few people have commented on about the inaccuracies, but it's usually more of a side note, is that most of the Greek gods don't look right. Sure, some of their appearance being off is down to stylization, but then there are just some gods that are just clearly done incorrectly. Ares, Hermes, and Poseidon are the easiest ones to see, and also Hades, but that's a slight different issue we'll get into. But overall, it's not with most of them, they're just so clearly off from their actual Greek or Roman versions that they don't even look right. Some of them are barely recognizable. Only a few symbols would really identify them. But of course, like I said, maybe this is just what they look like in this version of Greek mythology, so it's not inaccurate. But the intro holds the key. The intro that we see, that the opening that we meet the Muses in, is set in a museum, and we see a bunch of Greek statues, and would you look at that, they're Greco-Roman statues. So they look like how the Greco-Roman gods are generally depicted. And if you notice, that is not accurate to how the Muses tell it. meaning that the Muses lied. They at least got that detail wrong, so we know that the Muses can be unreliable. And this is a really easy detail to not mess up. I mean, the Muses should know what these guys look like. Even basic common assumptions would tell you that Ares doesn't look like this, Hermes doesn't look like this. It's not hard to not mess these details up. These aren't minor details. These are major things. So once again, if the Muses would lie about this, what else would they lie about? But we do have to ask the question, why are they doing this? Because all we can tell is that, okay, they got details wrong, but why? Well, that's an interesting question. There has to be some motive, and I think I figured it out. Now, I personally don't think the Muses were doing this of their own accord. What I mean by that is they weren't just doing this on their own, someone put them up to it. What's also worth remembering, to keep in the context of who could have done this, is that we do know that Greek mythology is at least somewhat true in this world because the Muses are here in the modern day, meaning that regardless of how much the story of Hercules in the movie is incorrect, it still means that some version of it happened, which changes this from they got stories wrong to literally effectively a form of propaganda. Someone put the Muses up to tell a alternate version of history as effectively a propaganda piece. Because remember, this whole thing isn't set up as a form of entertainment, it's set up as effectively how it actually happened. Notice the using of the term gospel truth, not a fictional story, but implied a certain level of importance to this story of Hercules. Also, as a quick side tangent, the fact they use gospel, which is a term pretty much exclusively used to refer to stuff in the teachings of Jesus, also imply that Christianity existed and has probably overtaken the story of the Greek gods, which is going to become important in a little bit here. So within the understanding of how most propaganda works, because most propaganda is designed to make the enemy look bad and make you look good, so it stands to reason who comes out looking really good in Disney's Hercules. Well, there aren't that many. Like we said, most of the gods are presented as these incredibly exaggerated figures, often to the point of ridicule, so that rules out most of them. Aphrodite was probably the first that came to mind but I think the reason she, although exaggerated, doesn't look off is purely because if you make the goddess who's supposed to be the most beautiful one in the entire pantheon look ugly, someone's going to pick up on that just not making sense. Even name it doesn't make sense. Hercules himself might also seem kind of obvious after all the entire movie is one. Hercules is really cool, guys, but the story also ends with Hercules eventually going to die of old age, which doesn't really work out very well if you're trying to set up yourself looking good if you're supposed to be dead. Also, because I think this is one that makes more sense. What's the only two Greek gods in the movie that don't only not get, characterized to oblivion, but also get a huge facelift to look better than they did in mythology? That being Zeus and Hera. They are infinitely better. This is something anyone can pick up on. Zeus is obvious, being a good family man dad, and Hera especially more obvious because in this version she's the mother of Hercules, which is not something true to original mythology, and also because Hera is a complete psychopath when it comes to Zeus's infidelity. But both of these come out looking really good. Sure, the designs are once again a little bit exaggerated, but once again, that's just kind of the art style there. But they come out looking very good in this movie. Especially Zeus, who has this whole opening bit of the song that goes on how he brought order to the world, which is also interesting because the Titans aren't mentioned as being Zeus's dad, specifically Kronos, because they are related, except in the Disney version, which would be awfully convenient if you wanted to distance yourself from those primordial creatures of chaos if you just quietly hid your relation to them under the rug. So Zeus and maybe Hera, but probably Zeus, is the culprit. But what's the end game here? Why did Zeus do this, hypothetically speaking? Well, I think the reason makes a bit of sense if you look at context. Given the fact that we can reasonably assume that Christianity exists and this is set in the modern day, it's likely that the Greek gods have just fallen out of favor within the world. They are at best minor cults, not worldwide religions. And Zeus really wants to get up his image again. Maybe he wants power, praise, or just to be respected. Maybe he's planning some callback or whatever. So he needs to improve his public image. And, well, Zeus in the actual mythology doesn't end up looking good. In fact, most of the Greek gods don't end up looking good. So it would stand to reason that Zeus wanted to kind of change the narrative around himself. And even so, with the other Olympian gods, though most of them come out looking kind of comedic and not terribly effectual, they are also firmly in the status of good guys. They are preservers of order, civilization, and keepers backs of chaos, even if necessarily not the most effective. So that gives Zeus's whole group, his main faction, a pretty good standing, even if he's kind of downplaying the importance of the others, but still making sure they're on it because they're good, if for no reason that they serve and help Zeus. And it's interesting that Hades is the one who gets villainized in this movie. Hades and Persephone, notice that Persephone is not even present, are pretty much consistently the only Greek gods with any real moral standing. I mean, obviously they do occasionally do some pretty questionable stuff, but they're also shown to be reasonable and at least somewhat amicable to situations. So, of course, those two get villainized. Which makes sense because if you're Zeus trying to set yourself up in a position of importance in the world again, you don't want people to then start looking at your brother, your older brother, who might reasonably be said to be a better person. So just gotta ruin his image a little bit. Now, the final question is, but if we assume that some version of the actual Greek mythology that we know in myth happened in this world, how does Zeus think he can get away with this kind of altering of the story? It's actually quite simple. The Muses. The Muses are the goddesses of stories. No one should expect them to get the story wrong. They tell the story of heroes and how it was. They were there, they should be telling it correctly. And notice how this entire thing is set up. This narrator originally is going to present it almost like a documentary, but a very boring and drying one with boring statues. Then comes in the Muses with bright colors, sounds, and a more action-packed story, although probably more like how quickly the action gets started, but that's a different addendum. I think, and this is my opinion, that the story of Hercules we see isn't just a movie as we see it, but it's also a movie in their world. This is some kind of pseudo-documentary propaganda put up by Zeus in a cartoony fashion, specifically to try to influence his image into looking good again. And that's my theory at least. But of course, this does lead to one final dark outcome. Where's Hercules? In the actual mythology, he's part of Olympus. And even though Hercules in actual myth is not perfect, he probably wouldn't approve of this, how this complete story is being manipulated, not to mention the fact that if anyone sees Hercules, they're gonna have to question, wait, why is he in Olympus? Well, I think it's very likely that Zeus probably imprisoned Hercules in Tartarus, or some other similar fate, just so he can keep this narrative going. That way he can tell Hercules is this incredible hero who did all these great things, and then quietly shovel him off when no one's looking. This happened a lot, surprisingly, in stuff like the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany, where they would prop up someone as an important figure, and then quietly, or usually quietly, get rid of them, so they could still claim to be a hero of the party, but also not have them rival to power or do anything like that. Which, given the fact that Zeus can act like a dictator in the actual myth, wouldn't be that far. So, not exactly necessarily a great end for our boy Hercules over here. Probably time for some rebuttaling. But ultimately, that's my theory. I want to hear what you think about this theory. Do you think it has some merits? I wish I could say it came with on my own, but I would need the opening part of this completely to my friend, who I will link in the description down below. And I really hope you enjoy this theory. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it down below. Please like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed. Please dislike and tell me why you didn't like it if you didn't like it, or you have some criticism of it or whatever. And I will see you all next time. Yeah. Hey, why don't you hit that sub button? You're gonna become a subscribble. Get to see my content quicker. Wouldn't that be nice? I bet so.